Last Thursday, the world of sports lost a great writer and author, John Feinstein, who passed away at the age of 69. New York Post sports columnist Mike Vaccaro knew John well, and he wrote a column recently to pay tribute to the sports writer. And now, Mike joins me to discuss the life of John Feinstein. Mike, how you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. I got the calm before the storm, so to speak. Calm
Yeah,
before the red storm, right?
calm before the red storm. We know
There you
this
go.
is coming. Selection
You
Sunday.
can
When we're
you can steal
recording
that
this.
if you want. It's all good.
I like that. That's good. That should be a good lead to a story. I'm sure multiple people are going to use that, but it should
That's
be
right.
good.
That's right.
All right, Mike. I want to talk about John Feinstein, and you recently wrote a column, as I just mentioned, reflecting on Feinstein's impact. What made him such a unique and influential voice in sports journalism?
Well, he had an opinion on everything. He really did. And, the thing about him, though, is his opinions were entirely formed by his curiosity. And so, therefore, if he had a thought about something, he would call 10 people that he knew who knew more about a subject than he did. And that's what would form his opinion in large part. Especially when when you were dealing with his newspaper columns or his books, he wasn't going to go half cocked just on stuff that he thought without any kind of backup. He was going to get the opinions of 10, 12, 15 different people. And that's how he formed his narrative. And that's how he formed, the basis for being such a reliable journalist on a lot of fronts. And, that's in large, he just loved talking to people. He loved talking to strangers. He loved talking to friends. He loved just being around people. He was a gregarious guy. He was a complicated guy. I never worked with him, but I know people that did. Occasionally would have, the kind of, run-ins that you have with colleagues. But every one of them, while they would acknowledge his complicated ways, I know they immediately felt the void on Thursday, as did I, who I never worked with him, but just delighted in his company many, many times across the years.
Yeah, I personally never got to meet him, but obviously knew of his work very well and was talking to some people in sports media about it like you, and some of the similar things they had to say about his process and how he worked, which is beautiful and I think should be in sports journalism. It's a process,
Yep,
different
absolutely.
process for all of us, right? But it's
Yep.
about trying to put out great work. And one of the great works that he put out, this, Mike, his book, A Season on the Brink, that changed the landscape of sports books, especially in a way that it provided inside access to a team. So how did that book and his other works, he had 44 books that he wrote, how did that influence sports writing?
Forever and permanently. I mean, now if you're going to write a season inside, you better do it with the kind of insight and integrity that Feinstein did doing that book. There really was, it wasn't the first book that spent a season inside with a team, but a lot of those prior books had come with conditions. And, the reason why the Feinstein-Knight relationship ended is because Knight claimed that Feinstein said he wouldn't include any of the curse words. Well, if you're going to have a Bob Knight book and include none of the curse words, you can have about a 10-page book.
Yeah.
And Feinstein would laugh at that. It's like, of course he didn't. Who in the world would do a Bobby Knight book and agree to those conditions? It just he thinks that at first he just blew it off and said whatever, but then once you see the first 30 f-bombs, all of a sudden Knight was a little embarrassed and he wanted to distance himself from it. But look, I mean, it was so compelling. And I think that's why it was such a bestseller. I mean, look, you're talking about a basketball coach in Indiana. That shouldn't necessarily be a huge bestseller, even though Knight was and became even more a compelling figure. Part of the reason he became so compelling is because of that book. And because Feinstein really did delve. And look, if you read that book, I think you come out away from it with a great opinion of Bobby Knight, a guy who believed in education, a guy who believed in his players doing the right thing, behaving the right way. And, he was dealing with 19, 20, 21-year-old kids. And sometimes those guys can be frustrating. As somebody who used to be 19, 20, and 21 years old myself can attest. And that's how the book came across. I thought he came across wonderfully in that book, to be honest with you. He cursed a lot, sure. If that offends you, then you're not going to enjoy the book very much. But the spirit of Knight was amazing, and he captured that. And it was because that book did so well that not only was he able to, pretty much after that, write his own ticket. I know when I met him, when he was writing a Civil War, he'd already written that book. He'd written Forever's Team. He'd written Hard Courts. He'd written Play Ball. He'd written A Good Walk Spoiled. But he decided he wanted to do Army Navy, knowing it wasn't going to, probably make it to the bestseller list, although it did, because he wanted to write about something different, not something as every day, and he wanted to tell other people's stories who might otherwise have their stories told. And he would revisit that time and again through the year. A book about the Patriot League. His last book was about Ivy League football. And so he wasn't always just trying to target, big money, big ticket personalities to write his books. The ones I think he enjoyed the most were when he was able to spend a day with the Colgate basketball team, on a snowy bus ride to Lafayette. I mean, I think those were the projects that really filled his heart with the most joy.
Yeah, and I think it helped fill other people's hearts with a lot of joy there, Mike, because he wrote the stories that he wanted to write, the stories he wanted to tell, and in some other way, the stories that needed to be told. Maybe, right? Sometimes the stories that aren't told as often. So I have a lot of respect for John in that and what he did. But I want to ask you about you and your relationship with John, because you had the opportunity to work not with him, but alongside him, and you read his work, as you just mentioned, throughout your career. What was your personal relationship with him like, and how did he influence your own approach to sports journalism? Because we know this as journalists, we are definitely influenced by other people within the industry. So how did he influence you?
Well, I got to meet John when he did that Army-Navy book, Civil War, back in 1995. And like I said, he had already been established. I was a columnist at the Middletown Times-Herald Record. I had all these big dreams and ambitions. And he took the time to talk to me. Obviously, I mean, he wanted to pick my brain because I was, part of my job was covering Army football. And so, and I was included in the book a little bit. But it wasn't just, he wasn't just using me. And he took a real interest in my job, my career, and me. We got along. We just hit it off. We had a lot of things in common. We enjoyed talking about everything, baseball and college basketball and politics and music and everything. And so we just got along. We hit it off. And as I proceeded in my career, he kept in close contact. I would always get a note from him when I got a new job. When I got the job at the Post, he couldn't have been more delighted. He was incredibly encouraging. And then beyond that, when I started to write books, I mean, my first book came out in 2005, and I got a note from John that I'll cherish forever, just saying, welcome to the club. And I wanted to write him a note back. And while I didn't do that, he knows and he knew that everything that I did as an author, I took observing every move he made. As he got bigger and bigger, he never acted bigger and bigger, and he never stopped for remembering that it was the work that allowed him to produce these great books. And I really respected that, and I tried to honor that when I would do my own books. And it was just and beyond that, he was just a lot of fun. I mean, I tell a story in my column today about he and I going to dinner at the 2012 Final Four with another friend of ours, and it just so happened that at the restaurant, the Basketball Hall of Fame was having its dinner, welcoming dinner to the new inductees. And Roy Williams had a bottle of wine over the table, and John's a famous Duke alum, so we joked about, do I really have to drink this? And like for the next 2 hours, there was a procession of every basketball bold-faced name you could imagine. And some of them came with bottles of wine, and we had to stop after a while because there's only so much wine you can drink, even with John Feinstein. But it was, my friend Steve Politi, who was the other man at the table that day, said it was like having dinner with the MC of the event, and he had no idea the event was going on. But he was just, and he would make a point to make sure that he introduced us to Roy Williams and to Gary Williams and to all the people that came over, Reggie Miller, and I obviously already knew, but David Robinson and Ralph Sampson. It was spectacular, and that was just a regular day for John, because that's how many people's lives he was a part of and how much influence he had in those lives.
Sounds like a fantastic dinner that I would have loved to have been a part
of. That was something. It was.
Yeah,
it was something.
I would have maybe kept a couple of bottles of wines for myself. That's another story for another day. Last thing for me, Mike, when you look at John Feinstein, how would you describe his legacy? And, when we always talk about legacy, it's the impact you have on people. So what do you hope that young sports journalists and sports fans as well, too, would take away from his life's work that he did in this industry of sports writing and as an author?
Well, I think if you read his books, the work is all over the pages. And John was the first one to admit that he was never going to win a writing contest just because he wrote pretty words. I mean, the reason why his books were readable and entertaining is because he was giving you stuff. He was giving you information. He was reporting the hell out of every subject that he wrote about. And I would like to think that going forward, 22, 23-year-old kids who come to Season on the Brink for the first time, who come to hard courts for the first time, who come to the majors for the first time, are able to recognize that the reason why you're able to produce this level of work is because of the work that goes into it. But I think there's also there's another side. I mean, he also wrote a bunch of young adult novels too, which I know were important to him because he was a great father to his kids, and it meant a lot to him when those books became successful because he felt like he was reaching to a younger audience who maybe might not want to immediately go from this book about two kids on an adventure right to Season on the Brink, but maybe someday would be compelled to do so because they remember John Feinstein, reading a John Feinstein book when they were 12, and now when they're 20, they might want to find more about what this guy was all about. Those books I know were terrific. I read a few myself, gave a few as gifts to kids that I knew who loved to read. And I think that's a gift too. I mean, he wasn't just a sports writer for sports fans. I know in my own career that there's no greater compliment than when an email or a text begins, I'm not usually a sports fan, but
Yeah.
because it means that I've, kind of broken out of that bubble for a day or two. And I know that John did that. I mean, people who weren't huge college basketball fans ate up Season on the Brink. That's how it becomes a bestseller, a runaway bestseller. And I think because they got a trust from him from reading that book, they would read him about golf, they would read him about baseball, they read him about tennis, and read him about just about anything. And I think that's what I think I would hope young writers would gather from reading John's books. The reason you become that appealing isn't necessarily by spewing hot takes all the time. It's by doing the work, putting the work behind the product that comes out between the pages of a book. And when the end result is as brilliant as John's was, more often than not, it's a real lesson and one that can be taught forever.
Absolutely. It is all about the work, and he definitely put in the work in his career, 69 years on this earth. John Feinstein. Check out Mike Vaccaro joined me, his fantastic column on John Feinstein and his impact on the sports world, sports fans, sports journalism, all over. Mike, always appreciate your perspective at times like these, on matters like these. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk about John Feinstein.
Dick, it's always great to talk to you. Thanks for taking a few minutes to remember a really good dude.
Anytime, my friend. Thank you.